The walls within. The Seattle rain tapped against the windows of Lyra Bennett's art therapy studio, creating a soothing rhythm that usually calmed her nerves. Today, however, her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the easels for her afternoon session. The studio, with its high ceilings and exposed brick walls, was her sanctuary, a place where she helped others heal through the power of art while keeping her own walls firmly in place. At 32, Lyra had built a reputation as one of the city's most innovative art therapists, specializing in helping trauma survivors find their voice through creative expression. The irony wasn't lost on her that she herself remained trapped behind invisible barriers, flinching at the mere thought of male touch, even after years of therapy. The soft chime of the studio door pulled her from her thoughts. "Ms. Bennett," a deep voice called out, causing her to stiffen instinctively. She turned to find a tall man with kind eyes and gentle features standing in the doorway, holding a leather messenger bag. "Dr. Rivers," she responded, maintaining her professional composure while automatically stepping back to create more space between them. "Thank you for coming to discuss the joint therapy program." Dominic Rivers moved into the room with a grace that seemed at odds with his broad shoulders and athletic build. His movements were measured, deliberate, as if he was accustomed to putting others at ease. As a physical therapist specializing in trauma recovery, he had reached out to propose a collaborative program combining art and physical therapy for survivors of assault. "Please, call me Dominic," he said, settling into a chair at a respectful distance. "Your work with trauma survivors is remarkable. When I saw your installation at the Thompson Gallery last month, I knew we had to connect." Lyra's breath caught slightly. That installation had been deeply personal, a series of abstract pieces exploring the concept of touch, from healing to harmful. She hadn't expected many people to understand the underlying message. "You saw that?" she asked, unconsciously wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "Most people thought it was just about texture and color." Dominic's eyes met hers with unexpected understanding. The progression from sharp, jagged forms to softer, flowing lines told a story of healing. It resonated with many of my patients who struggle with physical contact after trauma. For the first time, Lyra found herself truly looking at him. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he ran his fingers through it often in thought. His blue-gray eyes held no judgment, only genuine interest in something else, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit dedicated to helping others heal. "The program you're proposing," she began, moving to her desk where she felt more grounded, "it's ambitious. Combining art therapy with physical therapy isn't something I've seen done before." "That's exactly why it could be revolutionary," Dominic replied, his enthusiasm evident but contained. "Your ability to help people express their trauma through art, combined with gentle reintroduction to healthy touch through physical therapy, it could create a complete healing pathway." As he spoke about his vision, Lyra found her professional interest overriding her personal discomfort. The idea was innovative, addressing both the emotional and physical aspects of trauma recovery. Yet the thought of working closely with a male colleague made her pulse quicken with anxiety. "I would need to maintain certain boundaries," she said carefully, watching his reaction. Dominic nodded without hesitation. "Of course. All boundaries would be respected absolutely. We could start with separate sessions, coordinating our approaches but maintaining individual spaces." Relief flooded through her at his immediate understanding. Too many times, her need for physical distance had been met with confusion or dismissal. Dominic's respect for her limits, stated so naturally, began to ease the tension in her shoulders. The rest of the meeting flowed more easily as they discussed logistics and treatment approaches. Dominic shared stories of his patients' breakthroughs, his face lighting up when describing their progress. Lyra found herself sharing more than she intended about her own therapeutic techniques, drawn out by his genuine interest and thoughtful questions. As the meeting drew to a close, Dominic stood slowly, telegraphing his movements. "Thank you for considering this, Ms. Bennett, Lyra," he corrected himself with a slight smile. Even if you decide not to proceed, I'm grateful for the chance to meet you. Lyra walked him to the door, maintaining her careful distance. I'll think about it, she promised, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Your approach to patient care is refreshing. After he left, Lyra stood in her studio, surrounded by the tools of her trade, brushes, canvases, and healing. Her fingers itched to paint, to process the unexpected emotions stirred by the meeting. Instead of her usual abstract work, she found herself sketching a pair of hands, strong yet gentle, held out in an offer of help rather than harm. The rain had stopped, leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air. As Lyra packed up for the day, she caught her reflection in the studio windows. Something had shifted, ever so slightly, in her carefully constructed world. The walls were still there, but perhaps, just perhaps, they weren't quite as impenetrable as before. Healing hands. 2 weeks after their initial meeting, Lyra found herself preparing for the first joint therapy session with Dominic. They had agreed to start small, one patient who had specifically requested help with both physical and emotional recovery. The studio looked different today, with a massage table tucked discreetly behind a folding screen and easels arranged in a protective semicircle. Naomi Chen, Lyra's best friend and fellow therapist, perched on the windowsill, watching her rearrange the art supplies for the third time. You know, she said, taking a sip of her green tea, for someone who claims to be purely professionally interested, you've spent an awful lot of time preparing for Dr. Rivers' arrival. It's for the patient, Lyra protested, though she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Hannah needs everything to be perfect. You know how important first sessions are. Naomi's knowing smile made Lyra turn away, busying herself with organizing paintbrushes that were already perfectly aligned. Over the past 2 weeks, she and Dominic had exchanged numerous emails and phone calls, planning their integrated approach. Each conversation had chipped away at her defenses, revealing a man whose dedication to healing matched her own. The door chimed, and Dominic entered, carrying his usual leather bag and a potted peace lily. I thought the studio could use a touch of living art, he explained, setting the plant on a sunlit shelf. Peace lilies are known for their healing properties, they purify the air and promote tranquility. Lyra found herself smiling despite her nervousness. Thank you. It's perfect for this space. She introduced Naomi, who gave her a subtle wink before leaving them to prepare for their patient. Hannah arrived precisely on time, her slim frame tense with anticipation. At 28, she carried herself like someone much older, weighted down by invisible burdens. Lyra recognized the careful way she surveyed the room, noting all exits, a habit she herself had never quite abandoned. The session began with art therapy, Lyra guiding Hannah through expressive exercises while Dominic observed from a distance. As Hannah's brush moved across the canvas, her movements became freer, less constrained. When it came time for the physical therapy portion, Lyra found herself staying, drawn in by Dominic's gentle approach. Everything moves at your pace, Hannah, he explained, demonstrating stretches that would help release trauma stored in her muscles. You're in complete control. We're just here to support your journey. Watching him work, Lyra noticed how he telegraphed every movement, how he created a bubble of safety around his patients. His hands, capable of so much strength, moved with incredible gentleness. She caught herself wondering what those hands would feel like, and immediately pushed the thought away. The weeks began to flow together as their joint practice grew. More patients sought out their integrated approach, drawn by the promise of holistic healing. Lyra found herself looking forward to their shared sessions, to the quiet conversations between appointments, to the way Dominic's eyes crinkled when he smiled. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly challenging session, they sat together in comfortable silence, sharing tea from Lyra's collection. You amaze me, Dominic said suddenly, his voice soft. The way you help people find their voice through art, it's like watching someone learn to breathe again. Lyra's hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. Your work is equally important. You help them reconnect with their bodies, to feel safe in their own skin again. She paused, gathering courage. I've learned a lot, watching you with our patients. Have you? He asked, and something in his tone made her look up. His eyes held such warmth, such understanding, that she had to look away. Yes, she whispered. About trust. About healing. The space between them felt charged with possibility, but Dominic didn't move closer. Instead, he shared a story about his own journey into healing work, about the car accident that had left him struggling with chronic pain, about finding purpose in helping others recover. His vulnerability invited her own, and Lyra found herself sharing pieces of her past she had never voiced aloud. Breaking barriers. The autumn air turned crisp as Seattle settled into its rainy season. Lyra's studio had evolved, becoming a true sanctuary for healing. The peace lily Dominic had brought now had companions, a family of plants that brought life and energy to the space. Their patient list had grown, but they maintained the intimate, personalized approach that made their program unique. One morning, Lyra arrived early to find Dominic already there, hanging a series of her paintings in the waiting area. These deserve to be seen, he said simply when she questioned him. They tell a story of hope. She watched him work, noting how he had arranged the pieces to show a progression, from darkness to light, from isolation to connection. He understood her art in a way few others did, seeing beyond the surface to the emotions beneath. Their professional relationship had deepened into friendship, marked by shared lunches and long conversations about healing, art, and life. Lyra found herself sharing more of herself, drawn out by his patient understanding and genuine interest. She told him about her childhood dreams of becoming an artist, about the incident that had shattered her trust and touch, about rebuilding herself through art therapy. Dominic listened without judgment, offering support without pressure. He shared his own stories, of failed relationships because he worked too much, of the satisfaction of seeing patients recover, of his secret passion for photography. They discovered a shared love of old movies and terrible puns, of rainy Sundays and hole-in-the-wall bookstores. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a joint session with a new patient. As they demonstrated a combined art and movement exercise, Dominic's hand accidentally brushed against Lyra's. Instead of her usual flinch, she felt only a slight flutter in her stomach. The touch had been brief, casual, and for the first time in years, it hadn't triggered her fear response. Later that evening, as they cleaned up the studio, Lyra found the courage to address what had happened. I didn't panic, she said quietly, organizing paint tubes with trembling fingers. When you touched my hand earlier. Dominic paused in his task of folding therapy mats. I noticed, he said carefully. I'm sorry if I overstepped. You didn't, she assured him quickly. That's what surprised me. It felt safe. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. He moved slowly, telegraphing his intentions as he always did, and held out his hand palm up on the table between them. An invitation, not a demand. Would you like to try again? On your terms, completely in your control. Lyra stared at his offered hand, her heart racing. This was different from the clinical touch she had learned to tolerate from doctors or the brief contact required in daily life. This was choosing to connect, choosing to trust. With deliberate movements, she reached out, letting her fingertips hover above his palm. Dominic remained perfectly still, his breathing steady and calm. Slowly, so slowly, she lowered her hand until their palms touched. The world didn't end. Instead, warmth spread from the point of contact, and Lyra found herself focusing on the details, the slight calluses on his fingers, the strength held carefully in check, the gentleness she had observed so many times with patients now extended to her. Okay? Dominic asked softly, making no move to grasp or hold. Lyra nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. Okay, she whispered back. They stayed like that for several heartbeats, a simple touch building a bridge between their separate worlds. When she finally pulled away, it wasn't from fear but from a need to process the emotions flooding through her. Dominic gave her space, turning to finish cleaning up, but his presence remained a steady comfort in her peripheral vision. That night, in her apartment, Lyra painted until dawn. The canvas bloomed with colors she hadn't used in years, warm golds and soft blues, gentle greens and healing purples. In the center, two hands reached toward each other, not quite touching but full of possibility. Trust falls. Winter descended on Seattle, turning rain to occasional snow and wrapping the city in early darkness. Inside Lyra's studio, however, warmth flourished. The success of their integrated therapy program had drawn attention from medical journals, and their waiting list grew longer each week. But more significant than their professional achievements was the subtle dance of trust developing between them. After that first intentional touch, something had shifted in their relationship. Lyra found herself no longer calculating the distance between them, no longer flinching when Dominic moved near. Instead, she noticed other things: the way his eyes lit up when discussing a patient's breakthrough, how his voice softened when speaking to someone in pain, the gentle strength that seemed to radiate from him. One evening, as they prepared for a presentation to the medical board, Dominic noticed Lyra struggling with a heavy easel. Without thinking, he stepped behind her to help, his hands covering hers on the frame. For a moment, they both froze, the contact unexpected and intimate. "I'm sorry," he began, starting to pull away, but Lyra surprised them both by holding steady. "Don't be," she said softly, her heart racing but not from fear. "I trust you, Dominic." He remained still, letting her lean back slightly against him, supporting without constraining. "I know how much that means," he responded, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the bravest person I know, Lyra." She turned within the circle of his arms, facing him fully for the first time. "It's not bravery when you feel safe," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. Dominic caught her hand gently, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her entire body. "May I hold you?" he asked, ever mindful of her boundaries. In answer, Lyra stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. His embrace was everything she had imagined, warm, secure, completely without demand. They stood like that for long moments, her head tucked under his chin, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. The next few weeks passed in a blur of discovery. Each touch, each embrace was a new revelation. Dominic never pushed, never assumed, letting Lyra set the pace of their physical connection. She found herself craving his touch, no longer afraid but eager to explore this new language between them. Their work benefited from their deepening bond. Patients commented on the harmony they sensed, the way Lyra and Dominic moved in sync during joint sessions. Even Naomi noticed the change, teasing Lyra about the way she glowed. But healing isn't always linear. One afternoon, a new patient's unexpected movement triggered a panic attack in Lyra, sending her spiraling back into old fears. She fled to her private office, struggling to breathe, feeling the walls of progress crumbling around her. Dominic's knock was gentle. "I'm here if you need me," he said through the door. "No pressure, no expectations. Just here." His words anchored her, and slowly her breathing steadied. When she opened the door, he was sitting on the floor, waiting patiently. Without a word, he opened his arms, and she sank into his embrace. "It's okay to have setbacks," he murmured into her hair. "You haven't failed. You're still the strongest person I know." Canvas of love. Spring arrived in Seattle, painting the city in cherry blossoms and renewed hope. In Lyra's studio, a new collection of paintings took shape, pieces that spoke not of trauma but of healing, not of fear but of love. Her art had transformed along with her heart, though traces of her journey remained in every brush stroke. The morning sun streamed through the windows as Lyra prepared for their first public exhibition, a showcase of patient artwork combined with testimonials about their integrated therapy approach. Dominic found her standing before a special piece, one she had created over many nights. It showed two figures in abstract, their forms composed of swirling colors that merged and separated like clouds. Where they touched, golden light emanated, spreading healing warmth through the entire canvas. Looking at it now, Lyra realized it was their story, the careful dance of healing and love that had brought them together. "It's beautiful," Dominic said, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned into him naturally, no trace of fear remaining in her body's response to his touch. "Like its creator. I couldn't have painted this a year ago," she admitted, turning in his embrace. "I couldn't even imagine it." His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And now? Now I can imagine everything," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Their kisses were no longer new but had lost none of their magic, each one a celebration of trust earned and fears overcome. The exhibition was a success, drawing attention from the medical community and art world alike. But more meaningful were the quiet moments, a former patient thanking them with tears in her eyes, a colleague asking to implement their program at another clinic, Naomi's proud smile as she watched them work seamlessly together. Later that night, as they slow danced in the empty studio, Lyra reflected on their journey. "You never tried to fix me," she said, her head resting on his chest. "You just created a safe space for me to heal myself." Dominic's arms tightened slightly around her. "You were never broken, Lyra. You were always whole, just protecting yourself until it was safe to bloom." She smiled, remembering the peace lily he had brought on their first day working together. It had flourished in the studio, just as she had flourished in his patient love. "Move in with me," she said suddenly, pulling back to see his face. "My apartment has better light for your photography." His joy lit up his entire face. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she answered, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. "My art needs your light." Their life together unfolded like a canvas being painted, each day adding new colors, new textures, new depths. They continued their work, helping others find their way back to trust and touch, their own story serving as living proof that love could heal the deepest wounds. In their home, Lyra's paintings hung alongside Dominic's photographs, telling the story of two healers who found their own healing in each other's arms. And in their studio, the peace lily continued to bloom, witnessing the endless possibilities of hearts brave enough to trust again.